Jehangir is a postdoctoral scientist at the University of Cambridge at the physics department and works in biophysics. He is also a research fellow at Clare Hall. Jehangir has been closely associated with the UNESCO Parzur project for the preservation of Parsi Zoroastrian culture and heritage since its inception.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to Pageman and the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak at this seminar. It is a curiosity of our species, I think, that we crave an understanding not just of the world as it is at present, which would make perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective, but of our origins and our reasons for being here. We speakers were asked to discuss one or more of these so-called existential questions from the perspectives of our respective religions and science. Religions have debated and theorized about questions such as the existence of God, souls of the living and dead, the origins of the universe, etc., for thousands of years, since the pre-scientific era. Indeed, one might argue that providing some sort of hypotheses for answering these questions is one of the very reasons for the foundations of religion and various religions. Science, on the other hand, deals with the universe that we inhabit and attempts to understand this actual universe we live in all its wonderful detail. To quote the English philosopher George Henry Lewis, he once said, "Science is the systematic classification of experience." I chose today to discuss the concept of the soul, in particular because of its importance in Zoroastrian theology. Zoroastrianism, as many of you will know, is one of the world's most ancient religions and is, to the best of our knowledge, the oldest revealed religion, dating back over 3,000 years according to most estimates. Zoroastrianism contends that all living beings have a soul and that the fate of the soul after death depends on the choices made during its lifetime on the earth. After death, the soul approaches what's known as the Chinvat Bridge, or the Bridge of Judgment, where its life choices and deeds are examined. If the soul is found to have led a good, honorable life, the bridge opens out into a beautiful garden, which in modern parlance we would call paradise. The origins of the word paradise actually come from Old Avestan, paradise. On the other hand, for those souls that are found not to have matched up to the required standards of righteousness, the bridge narrows to a razor's edge, and the soul falls off into Druj Demana, which is the Zoroastrian concept of hell. However, unlike in Christian eschatology, these fates are not eternal, and at the Frashokeriti, or at the end of time, Zoroastrianism states that all souls, including those in hell, will be cleansed and purged of their sins. Good finally defeats evil, and all is harmonious, the happiest of happy endings. The soul and its judgment are very important concepts of Zoroastrianism, used to instill the importance of righteous and virtuous living. The two most important prayers in the faith, the Ashem Vahu and the Yathahu Vairyo prayers, stress the importance of always speaking the truth, which comes from the word Asha, Ashem, and also of helping one's fellow beings. If one speaks the truth and helps one's fellow man, one's soul is righteous and assured of the right outcome at the Chinvat Bridge. And I believe other religions have similar concepts in the sense that moral and ethical standards are often suggested as leading to an easier afterlife for the soul of the said living being. So the concept of living beings having a soul may be beautiful and reassuring and a very important tool for imposing an ethical standard of living on the adherents of a faith. But what can science say about the existence of a soul? Well, the fact of the matter is that we have no scientific evidence supporting the existence of these entities. And I might add, the question of a soul was just one example I picked, considering its significance in Zoroastrianism. A similar rationale may be applied, as we've discussed, to other questions such as the existence of God. We have no evidence of such a being existing. If indeed there is a creator, he is an excellent experimentalist who leaves his subjects undisturbed. Now, religion and science are both philosophies, different in outlook and approach, but philosophies nevertheless. Note here that I'm referring to the definition of philosophy that I've picked up from Teichmann and Evans as the study of problems concerned with the nature of existence, knowledge, morality, reason, and human purpose. Religion has various advantages in terms of imparting a moral and ethical standard of living to its followers. Different religions also have an assortment of cosmologies and creation myths, and one may marvel at the thought and effort that went into describing these concepts all those thousands of years ago. However, it is also imperative to remember that all this pertains to the pre-scientific era and really should not be taken literally, as we've been discussing, in the face of all the evidence that we've accumulated today. In terms of describing the physical world that we observe and live in, there's little doubt that science, with its focus on observation and empiricism, provides far more useful answers than any other system or philosophy of knowledge. I stated earlier that it is a fact that we have no evidence for the existence of souls. In today's day and age, let us investigate what a scientist means when he says something, he or she says something is a fact. The scientific method involves, in its simplest terms, putting forth a hypothesis, which is then experimentally tested and then either accepted or rejected beyond reasonable doubt, depending on the outcome of observations. The words beyond reasonable doubt are crucial here, and different groups of scientists will place different standards on whether to accept or reject a hypothesis based on certain statistical parameters. For example, we were talking about the Higgs boson. So if we consider the discovery of the Higgs at the Large Hadron Collider, you must have read in the press that they labeled their observation a discovery when it reached a 5 sigma confidence level. What does this mean? The 5 sigma statistical confidence level corresponds to a probability of about 1 in 3.5 million. This is not the probability of whether or not the Higgs exists. What it really means is that if the Higgs particle does not exist, there is only a 1 in 3.5 million chance that the data gathered would be at least as extreme as what was observed. Okay? To put it in simpler terms, a 5 sigma level of confidence in detection basically means that from the data gathered, the chances that the conclusions about the Higgs are wrong is about 1 in 3.5 million. And the only way you can make such a strong statement of discovery is if you do the experiment many, many times. At the LHC, I believe the typical event rate, so the number of collisions they see, inelastic collisions, is about 600 million collisions per second. So you get a lot of data. This is running at full beam. So you have to perform this enormous number of experiments before you can say anything is a discovery with this 5 sigma confidence level. Well, does this statement of discovery mean that the Higgs definitely exists? No, because one doesn't make such definitive statements. You cannot make such definitive statements. However, this 1 in 3.5 million chance of being wrong is what an experimental particle physicist would call a discovery beyond reasonable doubt. Now, different groups of scientists will use different metrics for calling an observation a discovery, depending on their experimental capacities. But the basic principle is the same. Now, this is how science works. The emphasis is on observation. To quote the motto of the Royal Society, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it. The more experiments that are done that verify the hypothesis, the smaller the probability that the conclusions drawn are wrong. To argue otherwise without satisfactory experimental evidence would be unreasonable and illogical. So at certain predefined statistical levels, you either prove or disprove your hypothesis. And from this, you generate facts. It's an emergent truth. And the use of these scientifically tested and statistically valid facts leads to objective improvements in our lives, in metrics such as health, lifespan, communication, travel, you name it. It contributes to knowledge. It helps us survive as a species. And this is why when it comes in particular to policy making, for example, it is so crucial that rational, scientific, empirically tested knowledge be used. Now, the scientific definition of a fact is based on statistics and probabilities. However, it seems to be conceptually difficult for us human beings to think along these lines. We always seek definitive answers and seem naturally disinclined to appreciate that the complexity of the world around us is the outcome of statistics and probabilities. A misunderstanding of these concepts is what leads people to mistakenly question scientific statements. And as we've discussed, a big irony is that I believe a similar misunderstanding exists in religions when people take what is written in scriptures literally. I actually consider this a disservice to religion as well and to the thinkers and philosophers who wrote these books in the first place. For example, as we've been discussing, we, the human race, are the product of evolution, beyond any reasonable doubt. Indeed, to cite one obvious example, our biggest current public health crisis of antibiotic resistance in bacteria is precisely because bacteria today are evolving resistance to the drugs that we have. Yet apparently 46% of the American population doesn't accept this. Religious leaders such as Pope Francis have declared their acceptance of evolution and the Big Bang theory, but that has not permeated through to a large contingent of their followers. The suspension of rational thinking in much of the world population today is a major worry and is a very real threat to the survival of our species. A common argument that scientists hear when it comes to the question of creation is that although science may have the Big Bang and can explain the course of the universe after the Big Bang, it hasn't addressed what actually caused the universe to be created in the first place, as we've been talking about. From an evidence fact-based perspective, this is true. We don't have any such explanation. That doesn't mean that scientists don't speculate on these questions. For example, one hypothesis that's very much in vogue at present is the so-called simulation hypothesis, propagated in its modern form by Nick Bostrom of Oxford, among others, but with origins that actually date surprisingly far back into antiquity. The argument basically runs as follows. With developments in computing technology, in virtual reality, and artificial intelligence, it is likely that future generations will have access to enormous computing powers. In such a scenario, it is possible that these future generations will want to run simulations about their forebears. Now, if they have access to enough computing power and the simulations are sufficiently fine-grained, it is possible that the simulated people are conscious. To quote Bostrom, it could be the case that the vast majority of minds like ours do not belong to the original race, but rather to people simulated by the advanced descendants of an original race. It is then possible to argue that if this were the case, we would be rational to think that we are likely among the simulated minds rather than among the original biological ones. In other words, should such technology be available, considering the vastness of the universe, it is far more likely, actually, that we are part of the simulation than the original species. An intriguing suggestion, actually, that I came across relates to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, talking about quantum mechanics, which places fundamental limits on the precision to which pairs of certain physical properties, such as position and momentum of a particle, can be measured and can be known. This fuzziness on the quantum scale could be viewed as a sort of pixelation in our simulated reality. It's an intriguing speculation, but as it is, it's all very interesting, but it's all complete speculation. We'll agree with that. A similar argument could even be applied to living systems. Synthetic biology is forging ahead at a tremendous rate, and I personally predict that I will live to see a completely synthetic life form created from a bunch of chemicals in a lab. Something like a very primitive bacterium. Then again, the question becomes, since we all evolved from bacteria, if we can actually create one ourselves and evolution takes its course, we could have intelligent beings a few billion years down the line who owe their existence to a postdoc or a PhD student slaving away in a synthetic biolab. In which case, again, are we the first? And again, considering the scale of the universe, it seems more likely that actually we're not. So the origins of life are very much under probe in synthetic biology labs across the world. This question is not solely the domain of religious or philosophical texts. Now, at its core, Zoroastrianism stresses the importance of truth and the search for knowledge and wisdom. Our god Ahura Mazda is, after all, the Lord of light and wisdom. One of the 7 Amesha Spentas, the Zoroastrian equivalent of the archangels, is Vahumana, the good mind. Coming back to my initial existential musings on the soul, can I reconcile a Zoroastrian belief in the afterlife with a scientific perspective? Well, a criticism of science as a philosophy of knowledge is that it cannot prove a negative. You can't prove that something doesn't exist. You can only state that there is no evidence for its existence. This agnosticism is certainly my present inclination when it comes to discussing the existence of such entities as souls or gods. Blind belief would actually, to my mind, go against the core philosophy of the search for enlightenment in Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is a religion or a moral philosophy of choice, and I personally believe that a search for knowledge through the tools of the scientific method is one of the best means of practicing this ancient religious philosophy of enlightenment. As Zarathustra himself said in his beautiful and poetic songs of wisdom, the Gathas, and I quote, "He shall do deeds of righteousness and seek always to foster life through Asha's law. Through humbleness, deep wisdom shall he gain. He shall reveal himself unto the wise by bringing blessings, teaching truth to men. Thank you very much.